councilperson for Mount Shasta. And he's going to just talk a little bit about what he does. He's actually not going to be city council member for much longer, but he's going to tell you what he does for the city and talk a little bit about elections and voting. So.
Great. Well, hello. My name is Michael. I am a citizen of the town of Mount Shasta, which allows me to be one of 5 city council members if the citizens vote for me. So in our last couple elections, I've stood for election, which said, yes, I'm interested, and was voted into being a city council member. Anybody who lives in this town of Mount Shasta can do this city council volunteer job. It does not pay very much. It's maybe $100 a month to pay your expenses, but it's really a volunteer job. So any citizen can volunteer to read through a couple hundred pages of stuff every couple weeks. So what does so for city limits, a lot of people, you think I live in Mount Shasta. The actual city limits for Mount Shasta are fairly small. They go up to a little bit past Shasta East Park. They go out to the park on North Mount Shasta Boulevard, and they stop at about before the Wayside going south towards Dunsmuir. So right there you'll see a Welcome to Mount Shasta sign. That's the city limits. So we're only a mile and a half each way. And so a lot of people live in Mount Shasta area, but they're actually not in the city limits. So it's probably more than half of our population in the valley is outside actual city limits. So who knows if they live in the city limits? Raise your hands. Okay, so we have a mix of both. And so we tend to not talk about city limits as much because it's better as a community to just talk about as broad as you can. Shasta Valley, South Siskiyou, it's just a little bit more inclusive. So city council is 5 members. We have 3 of the 5 are up for election this year. And so tomorrow they'll decide what are the new 3 people. Out of the 5 members, those 5 people vote as to who will be mayor. So the mayor of the town, generally the procedure, this is just a custom, it's not a rule. Those 5 will vote for the mayor. We tend to rotate it. So in 4 years, 4 of the 5 people will get a chance to be mayor. And they're staggered. 3 this year, 2 years from now will be another election, there'll be 2 up for election. So those 5 people decide the things that are within the jurisdiction of the city, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So when they don't agree, the majority rules. So how many votes does it take out of the 5 in order to decide which direction we go in? Go ahead. 270? In the town, 270 is a pretty good election. Of the 5 city council members, if you had 5 votes, how many votes out of those 5 decides which way we go? Go ahead.
3.
Right. So some bare politics. All it takes is 3 votes to decide the things that the city should do within the city's limits. And so we vote on everything, and whatever the majority decides, we generally move on and go from there. We don't come back and let's try to vote again, or oh, we didn't agree and let's do this differently and maybe we can change this person's mind. And so the way the city works is, let's talk about a jurisdiction. We have police, fire, water. The ambulance is a private party in Mount Shasta. It may not be in some cities. The ambulance is part of the fire department because you have emergency medical people that work there, and it's their ambulance gets paid for visits, and the fire department EMTs, we don't get paid when we roll it. And 2/3 of our call outs are actually EMT call outs, so we do it for free. Sewer, water, so that's toilet, your water. Public works, your streets. Any type of planning or building, that's a local municipality. And those are probably the big ones. What did I miss? I'm sure I missed some things. Anybody? Things you think your city? Question? Sewers, yep. So there's a separate sewer. The money that you pay for your sewer and your toilet stays with it, can only be spent on that application, which is the sewers. Money you spend on waters can only be spent on water. It can't be spent on fire or police or other items. And that's a state law of California. They're called separated enterprise funds, so that we don't charge you more on your water, and that's how we pay for the police guy. So they're separated financially. So the types of ways in which we manage are the city has a community-wide meeting and talks about what's our general plan, who are we, what's our mission, what are our values, what are things that are important to the town, and that gets put in a document called a general plan. And these are all open to the public. If you ever want to read a general plan of any city, it'll talk about who they are, what their goals, their visions, their things they'd like to accomplish in the next 10 or 20 years. It's a very general type thing. And then when you go below the general plan, you have something called a land use. So can I build a house? Can I put a business in a residential district? Well, you can if the city will allow you, but most cities will tend to break up their cities into residential, business, commercial, industrial, where you'll see warehouses and things. That all is done through a planning process. And so those are the types of things that the council members would vote on with input from the public. Is, do we want to have residents downtown? Do we want to have commercial businesses and bed and breakfasts in residential areas? Those are types of things that you see in your city, and those are governed by things called ordinances and land use codes. So that is called a zoning. Zoning is how you decide where in the city, what things are going to be allowed to happen. Other things you can look at as city. Let's say the dog is barking next to you, next door. Is there anything you can do about the dog barking?
No.
I mean, question? Yeah. Exactly. The first thing is not to engage third parties. It's to talk to the person that you have some question with and say, look, I've noticed your dog's barking. What's going on? It could have been a bear coming through the backyard. It could have been, you know, they're out of town and they're glad that you noticed they're out of town. So there's lots of reasons for some things to happen. And so what you don't want to do as a council member or as a citizen is rush to, oh, I've got to get government involved to solve this. A lot of things can be solved between yourselves. And sometimes getting government involved can make it a little slower and a little longer. Sometimes it can actually turn into something called an ordinance, which... Yeah. So sometimes it can make it worse. Sometimes if everybody agrees that we don't want this to happen, we don't want leaves to be burned in town, then you can work through the process. We'd have public hearings. People come in and say, yes, I want to burn leaves, or no, I don't want to burn leaves. And then the 5 city council members would vote and say, okay, we want to have an ordinance that says you can or can't burn leaves or park your RV. Or we'll say, you know, we don't think we should make a rule on this. Sometimes we'll duck it politically and say, you know, either way is maybe not something we have to do something about. So less is sometimes better in government, in some views. In other things, you want more government. So your food safety, you know, that's a federal government. That's not local. So those are called ordinances. And so you can go to the city and pull up a big book online. Has anybody been to the website in the city? So if you want to, you can go to the city website, and it'll pull up our pictures, it'll pull up all the types of things, but it'll pull up the agenda, it'll talk about what we're meeting, the minutes, you know, what happened at the last meeting, you can look up. And there's something called a municipal code. So all these ordinances, including the dog barking ordinance, are online. So if you ever have a question, you can go to the website, you can look it up for yourself, and you have the power of, here is the ordinance. This is an agreed upon rule that the police will enforce or the planning commission will enforce. So that's an example of types of things. So on the dog, you can actually call the police. They may come, they may not. After 3 violations of them coming and you complaining about the dog and the owner not doing something, it's actually a $100 fine. But we have probably never in the history of the city that I know of imposed a fine on a barking dog. So it gives you an example of government's not always the solution. The solution is working with your neighbors. The police will come and talk to them, but they don't generally want to give out fines and tickets. And we generally have a policy, which is something we talk about at council, which is our police are going to generally be a little lenient on the tickets. We don't give parking tickets downtown, even though you can only park for 2 hours. We don't go around and put up parking tickets, because that generally disincents people to come visit businesses if you got a parking ticket. And the $20 we would get or whatever makes you not so happy and makes us do paperwork, and the money is, we've decided it's better to just let that go and not actually enforce that. So those examples of where we actually have ordinances, the dog one and the parking, that we actually don't enforce. So there's a trade-off. You can have a rule, but not always is a rule enforced. So that's council. There's 5 of us. There's 30 members of the staff that work on police and fire and planning. Questions about the city? What do you have, rather than my diatribe, my long discourse? Any questions? Barbara?
Did you enjoy your 5 years working for the city?
Did I enjoy it? It was a growth opportunity. When you're in the public spotlight, you're forced to always take a higher road as to what you think, why you think it, making sure you get input, making sure you don't rush to a decision too fast. You always want to give the public comment time to happen. You want to come to your meetings with an open mind. And, generally as people, we have just ourselves to worry about. And so we think, oh, I like this, I don't like that. Oh, I'm for bike lanes, I'm against bike lanes, and you can rush to a decision. And by waiting and collecting more information, you can hear about, wow, who's going to maintain the bike lanes? Is it going to cause more traffic? Let's get more research. Will it change how people, and as you learn more, it helps you make a better decision. And so I think, that part has been a challenge. So you initially have your own opinion, but you have to put your own personal opinion aside and realize, what I do? I represent all the citizens of Mount Shasta, not just the ones that voted for me or the ones that did not vote for me. I represent all of the citizens. So you tend to be cautious about doing things that may upset half of the citizens. And this is a big issue for our council. Our personal position the last few years has been to try to stay out of political type things, because we have a very diverse city. We have people that believe strongly one way. We have people that believe strongly the other way. And when we tend to get into positions that polarize us, you see more what happens in national and state elections. And we've decided that that's not healthy, it's not productive. All it is the tyranny of the majority, whichever side is in charge. So we've tended as a policy to not talk about things that weren't basic to running the city. But again, that can change every 2 years, whatever those 5 people decide they want to run and what type of, policies they want to have. Other questions? Go ahead.
Did you have a favorite moment or something that happened while you were on city council that you really liked or appreciated?
We're sitting in my favorite moment.
All right.
Sometimes government can take much longer than you think it's going to take, and it takes patience and perseverance, and yet flexibility. It's an odd combination, because staff and government and getting people to vote, and you have to have public hearings, and you have to get public input, and all that takes a very long process. So the library is a case where the county cut off the library funding, and we sat down with the friends of the library and tried to figure out what are the right revenue streams. Is it property tax, sales tax? Is it some other special thing? How do we fund the library? And then talk to the citizens and say, oh, we're going to do this. Well, if you didn't talk to them, the citizens' feedback before we started the process farther was, we don't want it to be controlled by you 5 council members, because every 2 years you change and your policies change, and we don't want it to be political. And so one of the feedbacks from the community was, let's set up a library advisory council. And so that kind of is this buffer between council politicizing this revenue stream and the library. And so there's a library advisory council appointed by council, just like planning commissions and other beautification committees, that serves as looking after the library's best interests for the community. So that was feedback. By talking to the community, they gave us the feedback, and so we included that. And then, we worked our own internal political process, and then the council finally agreed to put up the $15,000 for the election, and then the Friends and all those groups did all the heavy lifting of, okay, now we've got to talk to 800, we've got to talk to everybody that's going to vote yes. And the political strategy that worked really well there was, let's just talk to those that are going to say yes. Let's not advertise it. Let's not broadly market it. Let's just get the people going to say yes out. Because it's a revenue thing, it needed 2/3 vote. And it passed. So that was good. Now the library has an independent revenue stream from the county and will be able to sustain itself forever. Mm-hmm. More than enough. And we have a new librarian. He just started beginning in November. And so this library over time is now going to be a creation of the community feeding back to the advisory committee. And then, we're just in the beginning. So it's exciting. So thanks to the Friends for all their hard work on that. But it was nice to actually be able to use government to think through something, to get to the citizens, to actually get the result back within that 4-year time frame. So
yeah, and that happened very quickly, didn't it? Like you're saying, a lot of things take a long time.
Yeah, yes, and that was, we're out of money, and how long can volunteers run a library? Right. I mean, it's just not fair. I mean, you can ask volunteers, you can say thanks, but at some point, it's a burden to ask people to do it for free, and it's a paying job that should pay benefits and health, and like every other job in America does. And so now we have revenue we collect from the citizens, and we are going to be hiring, we hired a librarian, so a new job in town, and we have partial people working. We still have volunteers, and the Friends still has the ability to come in and do special programs, and yet the Library Advisory Council can say, okay, we're going to do an addition to the library if we tend to manage our finances right, or we can. Right now, I think we're working on new carpet. So it was nice to actually see something and make a change. Other things took longer. The bike lanes you're seeing starting, the Birch to B Street thing, those were two other things we worked on. That took 4 or 5 years because it was more of a polarized issue, and we had to go back and put it in the general plan, then work through the funding, then set up a biking group, and then we had to go out and get grants because the city wouldn't pay for it, and then we had to find the 10% match because the city wouldn't pay the $13,000 out of the $130,000. So we got private people to donate that, and so that process took 5-6 years. I worked on that when I was on Planning Commission to start to build a bike plan and not have it be a burden on the city. So, I mean, the feedback was we don't want to pay for it. It's like, okay, we'll do it if you pay for it. So then we did it, and then it still became a polarized issue of we don't want bike lanes. And it wasn't about the cost or anything else. It became more ideological, I think. And there were some valid concerns on maintenance on them, and we'll see that's a risk. I mean, those thermoplastic, you see how we're carving up the streets? Those thermoplastic are supposed to be level so the plow doesn't tear them up, but they may pop up, they may freeze, they may, so there's valid, by listening to all the feedback, you get there's some real issues there. So, and that's why we didn't strike bike lanes, because we don't have the ongoing finances in the city to pay to strike. It costs a lot to strike. So, so those were a couple things that were, I think, sorry, go ahead. Oh, at times. It's kind of like flying an airplane. 99% boredom, 1% sheer terror. So it can be, at times, hard. We get 100 to 200 pages to read every 2 weeks. But you get used to it after a while. Sometimes you have really tough issues where there's not an answer to it. Sometimes you get really boring stuff that's just, let's approve this and move on. So it depends. Sometimes it's really hard when you have to learn how a sewer plant works and how do you charge for it and how do you charge your water rates. That stuff's fairly complex and you have to get in and read the detail. Some of the other things like, it's more your personal opinion of how you believe and community feedback. So, go ahead. Sorry. Question? Yeah.
Do you take care of other cities?
No, only the city of Mount Shasta. So when we run across something that's, let's see, what's on your ordinance? GMO labeling for food is something people will vote on in California. That's California's jurisdiction. So if someone came to the city, this actually happened, and said, will you guys come down one side or the other on this labeling thing you're voting on tomorrow? And we said, no, it's outside of our jurisdiction. It's all it's going to do is, upset half the people, and it really doesn't matter which half. That's an example of why we don't do things outside of our jurisdiction. So no, we don't do things outside the jurisdiction. Only the city of Mount Shasta. So. The blue question?
Did you have one?
Well, to answer your question, Barbara Moore, I didn't follow up on it. It was a good opportunity. It was a good experience. It had lots of frustrations, and it had lots of things that I didn't know I needed to learn that I learned. And, that's how life is. You step out there and you learn a little, and you thicken your skin up, and you move forward, and whatever you think provides the best service, the highest quality service to the broadest set of users. And as long as you keep those type of things in mind, you won't get down into some of the stickier parts of the job. Question?
How long did it take you to get the job?
How long did it take to get the job? One evening. I was what was called a appointee my first term. And so somebody moved outside city limits. Jesse Zapfi moved from here up to Madison, outside city limits. And so there was a vacant seat. And I'd been on the Planning Commission, so I kind of knew some things. And they approached me and asked me if I wanted to do it. So I went down there and sat with myself and Ned and a couple other people, and Russ and Ed voted for Ned, and Sandy and Tim voted for me, and we went on for 3 hours until finally Russ said, I think you'll be okay. And he switched over and voted, and that's how I got on. And then the next time I ran for election. So, and that is you start around August, and between August and November, you're putting up signs that you see around town and going through that process. So, question?
Are any of the other citizens females?
Yes, probably half of our citizens are females. Our city council right now is we all kind of look similar with bald heads and, gray, white hair. So, but we used to have a woman councilor before this cycle. We've had a couple. So we do. More women the better. It balances it out. Brings a little more different viewpoints. It helps. Question.
Okay. Does it matter if you're Democrat or Republican?
Good question. It matters, I guess. But if you tend to go down that path, you tend to say, I only want half of the tribe. I only want one tribe or the other to support me. It's kind of where the whole country is. So half of our town is Republican and half of our town is Democratic. But in reality, people are generally moderate. And so they will go back and forth on whoever they think is the best person. So it's more important that you don't use those types of labels in the city elections, because cities are supposed to be nonpartisan. We're not really supposed to be Democratic or Republican. You see that at the state level. But within cities, we don't use that label because most of the stuff you do, water, sewer, police, fire, they're really, what's in the community's best interest versus one part or the other. I'll come back. Purple?
Do you have to be a certain age?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I would assume so, but maybe not. There may not be an age limit. You might be able to be a city council member. I think you have to be a voting member of the public. Well, not a voting member. You don't have to have registered to vote to be a city council person, I don't think, either. So there may not be an age limit. I don't know the answer to that one specifically. Back to you. Question.
Do you have any extra votes because you have some power?
No. I vote in the election tomorrow as a citizen like everybody else. And the only time I have more voting power, so to speak, is when I'm voting with those 5. When I'm part of that 3 that's a majority, then I'm, one of 3. I'm 33% of the voting solution. That's where on those types of things I end up with more voting power, because the rest of the citizens don't get to vote. They voted for me, and now I'm supposed to represent them and vote. So I'm kind of I'm voting for this community citizens. But in normal elections, no. Question. Go ahead. No, you start.
Do you have to be a citizen of Mount Shasta?
You do. You have to live within these small city limits of Mount Shasta to run. So it's a frustration for people that may live on Old Stage Road, or they live in the resort, or they live south of town, they live north of town. They feel like they're part of Mount Shasta. They want to vote on whether we, have 24-hour police service or we have, whatever we would decide. But they can't because they don't live in the city limits. And they can't run for city council. How I got on was somebody actually moved 3 blocks away. But when they moved, they crossed the city line and they could no longer they had to resign. So yeah, you have to be in the city limits. Question?
Well, if you stay in what you are right now, after that, do you get to become president?
No, I would have to run for that election. And then I'd have to be Republican or Democrat, because the last person that tried this, Teddy Roosevelt in 1908, still lost with 35% of the votes. So we have not formed a third party. So, but no, you have to run, be 35 years of age or older and be a citizen of the United States. And yeah, just like everybody else. Question? Yep. Go ahead. I'll come back to that.
Isn't there already 3 or 4 parties?
There are a lot of parties. There's 2 main parties in the United States. We're really a bipolar country in some ways. We're a 2-party system versus a lot of other countries have a parliamentary system where, there's 3 or 4 major parties. We have a lot of other parties, independents, we have liberals, libertarians, we have a lot of parties, but 99% of the people in Congress and the House of Representatives are one party or the other. Yeah. So that's why we become so on, off, and hopefully they'll all work together, which is what the majority of people wanted to do, but politics. Question? Yeah, you?
What would the city council do if somebody became a governor that doesn't live in the city limits?
A governor, you mean like of California? California, they just have to be a citizen of California. But if
Oh, you know, Mount Shasta.
yeah, they wouldn't let somebody run for city council if they were not inside city limits. So when you go to run, you go to the county clerk in Wairika, you get a form, you have to get 20 signatures of voting residents in Mount Shasta, and then the city clerk there will certify you. She'll go in and make sure you had 20 people that were voting citizens of Mount Shasta, allowed you to run, and then she'll go look up your address and make sure that you're living in city limits. So you have to live in city limits, and the county clerk actually manages that. Question?
That's a comment. But someone that's our neighbor, they live like their house is right here, and the city line's right there, and he can still run for city council.
Oh, he can? So he's in the city limits? Yeah. Yep. You can be.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah. Question?
What percentage in Mount Shasta is independent?
Oh, anybody who's 35 years of age or older, an American citizen. I would say out of the 3,000 citizens, that's probably my guess, 1,800 people. Question?
How old are you?
How old am I? Oh, I'm 50. Question?
Do you think it will ever change about the rules that you have to be
in the city limits? That probably will not change. What we've tried to do is we've looked into enlarging the city limits to include broader area. But to do that, it goes through a county-controlled process in which the county keeps the revenue and you get all the expenses for the services. So that probably is not going to happen. It probably won't grow as a city larger. So. But on planning, an example, on our planning commission, we allow, of the 5 or 7 members, we allow 2 or 3 of them to be outside city limits. So you can be on a beautification committee, you can impact Mount Shasta, you can come to our public meetings and speak, you don't have to be in the city limits. So you can impact policy, you can sit on committees, you can make a difference and contribute. You don't have to be in the city limits. And so we've tried to be as encompassing as we can, but for city council you have to be in the city limit. Question? Purple. Go.
How long can you be a city council member?
As long as the citizens vote for you and you want to do it. So it's an election. Every 4 years you have to run for an election. And then the citizens decide we want you to stay for 4 more years or we don't, or you decide not to run. In my case, I'm not running again. So, question?
How long can a president wait, I forgot it.
I'll come back. Go ahead.
How long can a president run for president?
2 terms. We had a president in the 1930s named Franklin Roosevelt who ended up being a president for 4 terms, which is 16 years. And he had a very large impact on things like Social Security and how we run as a government. And after that, our government changed our Constitution to be 2 terms maximum instead of 4. They just felt 4 terms gave somebody too much control over too long a period. So, question? Any other questions? So, if you have anything in the city that you'd like to change or see different, you can always come to a council meeting. It's the 2nd and 4th Monday. And that's of the month. Yeah, we meet twice a month. So you can come in and say, I'm not happy with whatever you want to see changed. Come and you get 3 minutes to speak in the beginning of the meeting at 6:30, and then you can go. And it's great to have people show up, and it's nice to have feedback, because we don't know what the citizens want unless the citizens tell us. It's not like we're mind readers. And you could go ask 20 of your friends, but is that really respective of 1,000 people? No, you have to kind of wait for input. Go ahead.
Can the city council members get impeached?
Can we get impeached? We can get something called recalled. That's impeachment. The same process, but it's called recall. In order to do a recall, you have to get several hundred voters to sign a petition to recall a city council member. Mount Shasta almost went through one of those processes. It's easy to get the 20 votes, but then when you say, wow, I have to go get 25% of the voting population to say, yes, I want to have this election, then it actually goes to an election, and then all the citizens get to decide. But it's a fairly high hurdle of, people can talk about it, but to actually go through and do it, it takes a lot. And you saw some of that happen. You hear that because that's a political tool people can use, but not necessarily productive. So, and we went through that when in 2008, we had a recession and we had to balance our budget. We are 15% less people without laying anybody off. We just did not fill positions. But to do that, we had to cut health care from citizens. City workers right now get $950 a month for their health care, whether they spend it or not. It's tax-free. And then we pay 25% of what their health premium would be on top of that. So if you actually are using it for health care premium, we'll pay 25% of that. We cut that from $950 to $825 because it was still enough to pay their health care, and we didn't have enough money without laying somebody off. And so that was a hard decision we had to make then. And some people didn't like that and threatened to do a recall on some of the members. But we went ahead and did it anyway because that was in the city's best interest to balance our budget, which we have done the last. You don't read about us very much, the city council and the government, in the paper much. Everybody else is struggling, but we've made hard decisions early and built up a reserve and have tried to stay solvent. Question?
Now, did the citizens get a say in whether their health care should be cut or not?
In that case, no. Generally, the people that work for the city, the employees, it's not the citizens' health care, it's just the employees of the city that we're talking about. 80% of our expenses are salaries and benefits in the city. The average expense is about $76,000 to $80,000 when you count in wage, the average cost per citizen. And so we didn't have a choice. We had to cut there. Just like COS is 80% of their budget's personnel. So they didn't have a vote. They are represented by a union. And so in order to do this, we can't just do it. We have to sit down and negotiate with unions, with 3 different unions for 30 people, and come up with an agreement. If they do not agree, then we impose. And since then, the unions went to California and changed the law saying you now have to go to arbitration in between. So this was before that. So we sat through the unions, showed them our budget and why we had to do it in order to balance the budget. They didn't agree. The unions are never going to say, yeah, take it away. And they forced us to impose, which we then did. So, question?
In order to be a city council member, how long do you have to live in the city?
I don't know the exact answer. I think you just have to be registered, living in the city. You have to have, this has to be your main living address. So once you've moved here, you have power, you have water, those are the things the clerk would look at. Do they know you've bought a house, or you rented, or you registered, or if they don't know, they may call you if you're a renter and say, let me see your power bill, your water bill, and that would be enough probably. Okay, any other questions? Now, the nice thing about local government, this is my last pitch for you to all be volunteers, is nowhere in a democracy can you make more of a difference than in a small local government. As you saw, it's only 5 people. I'm one of 5 people that might decide do we have bike lanes or not. So in a statewide or a big countrywide, you don't have that impact. And so it's a nice thing about our democracy is we have these tiers of jurisdictions, and so a lot of things that are local to you, like water and sewer and your roads and fire and police, they're all decided by local citizens. So it's really, you do have a lot of influence, and so you may feel you may not have control over the big state or the federal, but within the city limits, 30 people show up in one of our meetings and tell us they don't like something, we're off working on trying to make them happy. So people don't just show up and are angry for no reason usually. So, question? The 2nd and 4th Monday of every month. So, good. Does anybody here want to be a city council member? Aha, future politician. Good for you. Public service. That keeps everything running as the volunteers around town. Not just here, but your schools and all the functions and clubs. Go ahead. 2 questions. Why don't you go first? You have a question? No. Okay. No. Okay. Okay, that's it. It's your last chance to look inside the murky ball of local government. Okay, thanks for your time and enjoy watching voting in action. It'll be fun to see what happens. It's always fun. Thanks.